Okay, we're gonna dive in. Very excited about this one. The last 3 or 4 months, especially, I've noticed clients inquiring more about, hey, like, how do we use these tools? We're excited about applying some of this stuff, but really just don't know where to start. And even though Notion AI has been around for a little over a year and some of our AI tools have been around longer, I really didn't see much of a difference in clients' focus until the last couple months. So, wanted to highlight a couple big things that I've noticed and how I've shifted my consulting. Hopefully, if you are consulting, whether that's Notion related or just in general, hopefully there's some takeaways in terms of what this might mean for us going forward. So excited to jump in. I feel like I know pretty much everybody in here, but if we haven't met or if this is the first time you're here, my name's Dave de Cespedes. I'm a Notion solutions partner. I've been doing this maybe almost 4 years now, and based in Miami, also a Notion ambassador. I will plug the Notion ambassador community again, mainly because of the community for one, which is great, but second, you do get access to upcoming beta features. So it's a really fun way to get a little bit ahead of what's coming out with Notion. Definitely consider joining. Things that we're covering today. I'm going to focus on 3 big changes in terms of how I'm approaching Notion consulting. Some tips to hopefully get ahead of, I think, when custom agents rolls out. That's going to be a big shift for teams, at least is my prediction. Some resources to hopefully recycle and remix and repurpose. And some notes about our upcoming bootcamp, which is starting in actually 2 weeks from today, which I'm super duper excited about. This is just from almost reaching 4 years of consulting and seeing the rapid changes over the past like 3 or 4 months. I feel like this is a big turning point for consulting. On the one hand, I think there's a lot of opportunity in terms of helping teams work smarter, work faster, scale their businesses. But I think the execution is going to look very differently. So on the one hand, I feel like there's going to continue to be demand, but I do think for consultants that aren't adapting or rethinking what does this mean for the value that I'm delivering to clients, that's going to be a challenge. So as long as we're up to date with the latest features, workflows, whether that's in Notion or just general consulting, and we're keeping up with clients in terms of where their questions are, where their priorities are, I think that's the key. So I think as long as we do that, we should be in good shape. And I think specifically when it comes to Notion, a lot of the building has just gotten so much easier. When we think of the AI assistant in building formulas or upcoming custom agents, or just Notion AI being able to not only give us responses, but create new pages, build entire databases, relate databases. These are all things that when I first started were very much, hey, we don't know how to do any of this. So we just need you to set this workspace up and then we'll take it from there. And I think teams in general are just getting a lot more resourceful. I think more team members within organizations have gotten used to hacking together 1.0 prototypes or solutions. And I think that's going to continue to be the case. The kind of DIY approach is, I feel like as an energy is definitely spreading. And I think that can work in our favor. There's 3 big changes that I want to highlight. And we have some examples and references in that link that I shared to hopefully tie this together so that it's not a presentation and more of like we can use these things to hopefully adapt. Most of us have been in previous live sessions, but I talk heavily about the workflow audit, primarily because when I first started Notion Consulting, I would just jump straight into building mode and get excited about all the different things that we could build, all the properties that we can build within a database to show days until completion, or is this week busier than any other weeks? And what I noticed was I wasn't getting the right information up front and was building the wrong solutions because I didn't really have an idea of what the core problems were. So this has been like a few years in the making now in terms of getting as much information as possible up front from clients so that we could essentially back up every decision with notes, anecdotes, or data that we're capturing early on in the process. The other thing too, as an aside, is when, and for just to talk about proposals for a little bit, on every discovery call, I only talk about the workflow audit. That's the only scope of work at that stage. For the scenarios that I tried to scope out, even with a few conversations in advance, here's what it would look like in terms of time frame, deliverables, it would always end up looking differently, mainly because the more we're working together, the more we're uncovering, hey, we should actually focus on this thing instead, or there's just more scope involved that we're in agreement needs to be done. But then we have this kind of like 1.0 project that doesn't quite fit. So then you have to backtrack a little bit. So focusing only on the audit does two things. Number one, it is less of a risk on their part. So it's signing up for anywhere from 2 to 4 weeks of just a discovery process where we're building out a roadmap. And I always position it as, hey, if you want to take this outline and roadmap and try to build it out internally, that's an option. And in the resources that I shared, this is also an area that has gotten a lot easier to populate automatically. For example, if we have 1 or 2 kickoff calls where we're diving into things like team hierarchy, maybe the client is sending over some bullet points on some of these questions and we're filling in the gaps over a few calls. Notion AI has just gotten really good at throwing meeting notes or bullet points in the sidebar and just saying, hey, can you just fill in the gaps in our audit so that we don't have to manually go into each question and fill in while we're on a meeting or have the client fill in, which is where we started and it was very tedious. So on the one hand, it's like important information, but on the other hand, like we don't want to add on more manual work for clients. And then the other update, if you downloaded this at some point in the past, is the AI block at the very bottom. This is basically taking all of our responses by category. What is our org chart? What are our pain points? What does our tech stack look like? And essentially putting together a summary of where the company is at, key areas of concern, and prioritizing those areas so that at least we have a synthesis of what are the highest priority areas and can at least talk about these items to brainstorm on where's the best place to start and where we're going to focus on those first few sprints. So that's one area that I think with just AI blocks getting a little bit smarter has been super helpful. And then I think to zoom out a little bit, when we think of how AI is changing day-to-day work, both for us and for clients, it's definitely getting easier to build things, get things up and running, summarize information that we already have. What it's not quite as good, at least yet, is decision-making. Like we have our workspace, what should we prioritize in terms of workflows to optimize? So that's still a very kind of human act or human kind of process that, again, we're trying to leverage AI to just work faster and more efficiently, but the benefit it really is in the decision making for clients in terms of nobody has the bandwidth to rethink their workspace or optimize their workflows. And more often than not, they just need somebody to come in and make some decisions and hold them accountable to why we're making these changes, what are the benefits, and getting buy-in from everybody on their team to make sure that everybody actually does the things that we're proposing. So I feel like that's a key component of what the focus of consulting is going to be going forward. Okay, so went through that one. The second thing is building AI first workspaces, and this might seem a little nebulous, so I wanted to get into specifics of what this means. What I noticed with a lot of client workspaces is teams often don't quite have clarity on what's up to date, what's incomplete pages or databases, and what should be archived completely. So when we ask Notion AI for some information, or later on when we start implementing custom agents, there's going to be more confusion as to what information am I looking at, what is the most up-to-date information. On the one hand, it's great that teams just get in and start building, and that's good energy in general. But the downside is we end up with a lot of like half-baked databases and pages that are duplicates or 10 different meetings databases, things like that. So when we think of AI first workspaces, any AI workflows, whether that's Notion AI, custom agents, or third-party automations, are going to work a lot more effectively if we have some clarity on a few things. Number one, what's reference information, basically like an internal wiki or knowledge base, versus what's being updated regularly, like tracking project statuses or task statuses. As a general rule, I know some of us would probably disagree, but I don't like to keep any data in task pages, mostly because I have some recurring tasks and I use it as a quick checklist. And I just disregard that from any like Notion AI searches and default to, if there's any updates or information, I just put it at the project level or in meeting notes. I've just noticed when I had tasks turned on, it's looking through 50 different tasks called Notion Consulting and just takes a lot longer. So something to keep in mind there. Something that's also gotten a lot easier and I would highly recommend is one of the resources in the page that I shared is an AI readiness assessment. This started as a Notion form, and I'd say I've used this not with every client, but for clients that are more focused on incorporating AI. They've noticed that team members are like going rogue and using their own tools independently, and they're a little freaked out that we're sharing internal resources and documents and want to put it under one roof. So this has been used in those cases to figure out, okay, where are we with our current AI work, and then breaking down our answers into levels. But with Claude Code, for example, this is again taking just general notes on, hey, I'm trying to create an AI readiness survey for clients to get a sense of where they're at and to be able to have something tangible to talk about in terms of how we might move forward with implementing AI workflows. So this is just like a quick form. I'm just answering some questions here. And when it's done, I get this kind of assessment that's really just based on the notes in Notion. Some recommended next steps. This is just how would we approach this based on the level, and then just a quick summary. It's gotten really easy to build these type of surveys or calculators that are a little bit more personalized than if we were to, say, use Notion Forms or Tally or some of the other form builders. If you're curious and you use Claude or use any of the AI tools, just drag and drop the stuff from the AI readiness page, and then you can customize it from there. But yeah, I've just been building a bunch of stuff there. Okay, want to get through one more shift and then pause just to field questions and then see where we're at with some of these, or if we have any things that are top of mind or questions that are top of mind that we want to cover, just to get to those a little earlier. The third shift is, and I know a lot of us are doing this already, when I first started Notion Consulting, it was pretty much 90% building workspaces in a very much like freelancer production model, would price it by the scale of the project and the time. Whereas I think now the building has gotten a lot easier. A lot more team members within organizations have a DIY attitude, which again is a general net positive, but still need guidance on, hey, are we doing this right? Should we be doing this differently? Are there features or functionalities that we're like not taking advantage of? Those types of conversations are still a little bit of a struggle internally for teams, mostly because nobody has the bandwidth to keep up with all of Notion's latest features and how has Notion AI changed from its latest update to 3 months ago. So I think that's where, specifically in Notion Consulting, staying ahead of it and being able to be more proactive in terms of recommending ways to improve workspaces and workflows goes a long way and is something that people don't have as much of a bandwidth for. And then from there, when we talk about implementation, if we're focusing less on building, if we imagine like in 6 months, we could probably prompt the latest version of Notion AI to set up entire team spaces and just give it general information, maybe feed it some imports from Google Docs or Google Sheets, and then have it set it up. That's not that crazy, I don't think. But where teams, again, are going to need help is how do we make sure that our team adopts these new workflows, we field any questions that come up, think through onboarding new team members so that they get in and know exactly where to go and can answer their own questions, hopefully, and make sure that teams are bought into changes. Some of the earlier clients that honestly didn't go that well had a lot more to do with not getting buy-in from the team than it had to do with what we were actually building. And that really comes down to, is there buy-in from leadership? Are they excited about the changes? Are they clear on why we're making these changes? because that has a huge impact on an entire organization getting excited about changes versus feeling like this is a very top-down decision that they haven't had a part in, and generally a bad way to start. And it's really hard to get that momentum back when we roll things out and there's confusion, there's chaos, there's multiple versions of the same information in different places. It's just hard to get everybody back and set a reset. Being able to proactively predict some of these questions that are going to come up is pretty huge. And one other resource, this is not, I'd say, one-to-one with every client, but this has been maybe the most common change. And I wanted to highlight a few things in here that to hopefully clarify the lesser focus on building and more focus on change management. So when we think of our discovery and audit, we're doing a lot of just downloading of information. How does the company work? How is it structured? What are the pain points? And expanding on these, I'm noticing we are getting into 3 to 4 weeks for the audit process, whereas before it was usually like a 2-week thing, mostly because it might be checking in with different team members in different departments, making sure that we have accurate information before we start building or suggesting anything. They're still making sure that if we do need to build spaces, we do have a plan for that and what that looks like. I think when it comes to a real example of this for clients, there may be cycles of these per department if it's a bigger team. Design and architecture might be 2 sprints if it's a small team, but if there's 3 or 4 different departments using Notion, there might be a cycle of design, implement, rollout, and then move to a different team and do the same thing. But if we dive into this, we could treat this as maybe a bit of a checklist to think through, are there any things in here that we're currently not doing or we haven't done that we might want to implement for future projects? And in cases that we have like deliverables or action items, there's little descriptions on what does that end up looking like. And in the bootcamp, when we get into project management and delivery, we do a deep dive on some of the more change management aspects of working with clients, which is a little bit harder to templatize. I think when we think about building, it's a lot easier to create a checklist and then work our way through the checklist, deliver it to the client, boom, we're done, we can move on to the next project. Whereas I think with change management, it's a lot more reading the room in terms of where the client's heads are at and where we may need to prioritize a little bit more time or less time, interpreting the signs a little bit more, and then having more of a proactive role in how these things are rolled out. Just a quick aside on before we jump into the next part, the one maybe surprising thing about working with venture capital firms is we need a lot more time for implementation. And I think it's for a couple reasons. Number one, everybody's super busy. In venture capital, it's very unique set of challenges where on the one hand, they're trying to raise their own money. And then on the other hand, they're fielding investment prospects and working them through a pipeline. And then there's a third component, which is getting their firm in front of the right founders through events, through marketing. So there's all of these moving parts, and there's not really a standard project management workflow. There really aren't projects in a typical form. It's really just deals, prospects. There are tasks, but the tasks could be tied to pretty much anything. So as a result, the milestones that we set up, they may seem like they're very basic. This week, our number one goal is just getting every partner who's in our weekly check-in into the same Notion page within our meetings database. That's the goal. We're not jumping ahead of that because there are foundational things that teams need to do and need to know where to go. And for us, we're living in this work. It's easy to forget that for clients who have 100 different things happening at one time, maybe they still have a bunch of Google Sheets or a lot of conversations in email, and they're new to Notion. This stuff is very new. And so teams need, in some cases, a lot more time to get up and running. So when we're writing proposals, and they could be 3 to 6 months, a lot of that has to do with making sure that there's enough time for teams to adopt new workflows and to field any questions when they come up. Something to keep in mind there, as we're surely going to get pushback. When I went from proposing in a like a flat fee project model to more of a monthly fee and only pitching the audit, definitely a lot more pushback in terms of the fees, the timeline. Why does this take so long? Why is it so expensive? And so being able to back that up with, okay, here's the exact process that has worked for previous clients. And then from there, it's a very kind of black and white. Either they're bought in and mentally invested in the project and the goals, or they're not. And that's okay. We're gonna get a lot of no's. So 7 out of 10 are probably gonna be no's, and that's if we have a good win rate. We're definitely already moving from a building focus to more of a decision-making focus. I think that's going to continue. I think the consultants that position themselves as trusted decision makers within a niche will do well. And I think for consultants that are focused on building and production and don't have a plan to transition into that consulting decision-making model, I think it's going to be increasingly challenging to get those projects in and then also make sure that those projects are profitable, because I think the price of these projects are going to go down unless we're modeling it as a consulting service. This is just more anecdotal, but from conversations that I'm having, again, in the niche of venture firms, there's definitely more of an interest and curiosity. I think teams are seeing their competitors using new tools and new workflows and maybe feel like they're a little bit behind. Again, I think that's an opportunity that works in our favor to communicate, hey, here's exactly how adopting these new workflows, incorporating whether that's Notion AI or automations or integrating Notion to other tools, the more clarity we have on how that's going to affect their day-to-day work, whether that's a saving in time or getting more time and energy back for like deeper decision-making work, whatever that offer is to the client, there's definitely interest. I think there's just not a lot of bandwidth to really think through, how do we build this from scratch? How do we go from 0 to 1 in getting these workflows up and running? If we go back to decision-making, the big rationale for having a niche that we're creating content about, creating templates and resources for, is that it will make it a lot easier to position yourself as a trusted decision maker if you've worked in that space and you have had wins with those particular type of clients. If I was pitching VCs a year ago, which it was a lot harder because I was creating content here and there, but I really had only worked with one client. So it's a lot harder to build that trust when you don't have previous kind of wins under your belt. And I think for consultants working with any and every type of client, which when we're just starting out is completely expected. Like we need to get repetitions and we need to get that from everywhere. I didn't really figure out a niche until a year ago, which is almost 3 years in. So if you're already thinking about it, you're probably ahead of the curve, but that's a big factor. And it's not to say that when you define a niche, you 100% can't take on other projects. I think the difference is when you're creating content and you're creating resources, they're always solving a key pain point for that target audience. There's a graphic design agency I still work with. There's an architecture firm we're starting next month. So it's not to say that you define a niche and say, hey, I can't work with you guys anymore. I'm shutting my doors. Maybe at some point, but not yet. But something to keep in mind there when we talk about defining a niche, which is also something we're getting into in the course. Couple quick notes if we have a spare few minutes, because we're kicking off in 2 weeks. But I'd say the big goal with this course is trying to get all the information together that I wish I had when I started 4 years ago, because there was a handful of consultants, maybe 30 at the time, and I would pick their brains and try to it was a lot of trial and error, and it was very inefficient to figure out what works with my target clients and for me personally. But there are a bunch of lessons in here. So there are some essentials, which are actually going to be available to everybody so you can explore. But then we essentially get into 3 key categories. One is onboarding, second is business development, and then the third is working with clients. So we're trying to, we need to make sure we have a healthy list of warm leads. B, we need to know what's going to be the things that we focus on to turn those leads into projects and deals. And then lastly, how do we make sure that we execute on projects? We know what to build and what to implement so that those clients can refer us to other clients and could give us testimonials and keep our businesses running. But one more key difference between the bootcamp and our live sessions, which we're going to continue to keep doing, is live sessions are typically focused on one area at a time. We're sharing as much playbooks, templates, resources as we can. The bootcamp is really focusing on going into a sequence of what does it look like to define our niche? What does it look like to create content that solves key pain points for our target audience? And really moving through the process of making sure that anything that we're spending our time on has a return and has a purpose, which is getting the right clients to sign on. A lot of these resources are already available, but I think in the bootcamp, the one key difference is we do a little bit more deep dive on each of these individually. For example, if we get into writing winning proposals, we're getting into details on what's worked, what hasn't worked, what feedback have I gotten. So each topic has its own deep dive that we hopefully have some do's and don'ts so that you hopefully can scale your business faster and avoid some of the pitfalls that I learned from. If you're curious, I'll send the link to that. You could just notionconsultingbootcamp.com to get more info. So that's all I got. Hope it was helpful. Drop in any feedback or send a reply to the event follow up if you have any notes or anything that you want to cover or wanted to cover. But otherwise, have a great rest of your Thursdays and see you in the next one.